I'm so grateful to Denise, who came up with this idea about preaching entirely from the 3rd chapter of Colossians. I confess, kind of like the Greater Unity statement the other night about my facility with the Old Testament. If you weren't there, you won't get it. I wasn't that sharp on Colossians, and I've learned a lot about Colossians. This 3rd chapter is really, really terrific. Today we're going to talk about Paul's vision for the Christian lifestyle. And I think it's an important message. Really, it's kind of a two-part. This is part 1, part 2 next week. So this is the 4th in the series, I think the 4th in this series, and it will be the 3rd sermon I've preached on just the 3rd paragraph of this 3rd chapter. Let me start off by recounting a conversation I had a number of years ago when I was on the campus of my alma mater in Georgetown, Texas, Southwestern University. I'm on the board of trustees. And one afternoon, the president and I, a beautiful day, walking across the campus during a break between the classes, and we happened to notice a lot of students we were on the sidewalks, but a lot of students were taking a pathway across on the grass. And the president told me a story that I think is pretty well known amongst college presidents. I think it's a true story, maybe about Yale or Princeton, I'm not sure. But it was about a college that was built many, many years ago. And when the buildings were complete and they were working on the landscaping, they had a meeting of the building committee. And the architect or the contractor, whoever it was, said, we need to get to work right away on the sidewalks, so we'll have them in by the start of classes. And the president, who was pretty savvy and experienced, he said, I've got an idea. I'd like to delay that project at least 1 semester. And everybody said, why? He said, rather than building sidewalks and expecting the students to follow the sidewalks, why don't we wait and let the students make their paths across the grass, and then we'll build the sidewalks where the pathways are. Right? That was a pretty smart thing, wasn't it? How many places have you been where there are sidewalks and then there are pathways across the grass? Pretty smart, I think. So there are 2 ways of doing that. You can set your standards and hope that lifestyle will follow. It will follow standards, or you can just let people do what they want to do and adjust your standards to lifestyle, right? Well, when it comes to building the sidewalks in a university, I think that idea about following experience is maybe a pretty good idea. You see how people want to go, and then you just adjust the standards, the sidewalks, to the direction in which people are going, the pathways they are taking. But when it comes to building a significant life, a life of meaning and purpose, a good life, it does not work. In that case, you have to figure out what your standards are and then adjust your lifestyle to the standards. So on the subject of pathways, maybe the best way to talk about this is that when it came to Paul and his understanding of the Christian lifestyle, his vision was the same as the psalmist hundreds of years before. Lead me in the paths of righteousness. Lead me in the paths of righteousness. And so that's what we see from Paul in this 3rd chapter of Colossians. What does it mean to lead a Christian lifestyle? How does that affect our behavior and what it is that we do every single day, or what it is that we strive for every single day? Now, I'm going to go into the weeds just a little bit here. Paul was sometimes accused of being an antinomian. That word, it's a fancy word. It just means that he was against the law, that he rejected the law of Moses. And people debate this. People debated it back in that day. Scholars still debate it today. But you can find plenty of passages in the New Testament where it appears as if Paul rejects at least some of the law of Moses. Whether you agree with that argument or not, here's what you cannot accuse Paul of doing. You cannot accuse Paul of having no standards for Christian lifestyle. Paul preached loudly and widely that we are set free by Jesus Christ. But he also made it clear that being set free by Jesus Christ didn't mean that we can do anything. Paul had his standards. So Denise preached this brilliant sermon last week from the first paragraph of this 3rd chapter. I'm going to put it up here. We're going to review this just a little bit because here's where Paul is making clear, before he gets into the 3rd paragraph, we're going to talk about his vision for Christian lifestyle. Here he makes it clear that it doesn't mean there are no standards. If you've been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things that are above, not of this earth, for you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. So this is what he says about standards. When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you also will be revealed with him. So put to death whatever in you is earthly. And he goes into this list of things that aren't included in a Christian lifestyle. Rules, if you want, laws, fornication, impurity, passion, evil desire, greed. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming on those who are disobedient. Then he goes on with this list. These are the ways you also once followed, but when you were living that life. But now you must get rid of all such things. Anger, wrath, malice, slander, abusive language from your mouth, lying. So Paul, antinomian or not, whether he rejects parts of the Mosaic law, he does not reject these standards for the Christian lifestyle. When we get, I'm going to string this together, but when he gets to the 3rd paragraph, in the RSV it's broken into paragraphs, the 3rd paragraph, beginning with verse 12, Paul moves from talking about these standards that can be spoken of in terms of rules or norms. And instead what he does is he paints us a picture for what the Christian lifestyle at its very best looks like. So we're going to go to our text for this morning, beginning with the 12th verse. This is what he says a Christian life looks like. As God's chosen ones, holy and beloved. We've preached about that remarkable phrase. You are holy and you are loved. Clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. These are the positive. Where in other places he talks about the fruits of the Spirit. These are the positives that denote his vision for Christian lifestyle. And then let me just tell you right now, this is about 2 things, community and love. For Paul, the Christian lifestyle involves being knitted together in community, but a community defined by love. So here it is. Bear with one another, community. And if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other, just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds, look at that word, which binds everything, glues everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. When Paul talks about this understanding of the Christian lifestyle as being enacted through community and defined by love, he is talking about a central concept that cannot be ignored when we start talking about what it means to be followers of Jesus. I want to put this unambiguously, at least to a great extent, if not completely. One cannot live out Christian lifestyle in isolation or in any kind of solitary way. Christian lifestyle, by definition, is lived in community, and it is defined by love and forgiveness. I want to talk just a little bit about the role of community in American society and address what I think is the despair of our time. When Alexis de Tocqueville came to America in the early 19th century, and he became the premier observer of the American experiment. He went to Washington, he read the Declaration of Independence, he read the Constitution, he observed the Senate, the Congress, the presidency, the Supreme Court. And then he spread out and he traveled all across America, observing the way in which Americans have organized their life together. And he was astounded. He was astounded. He said, there is something extraordinary about America. We've never seen this before in all of history. But this is what he also said. He said, I've been to Washington. I've read the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. I've seen the government in action. It is unique. It's a new experiment, but it is not the secret of the American vision. He said, the secret of America lies in what you find in every big town and small town, the rural villages of America. And that is a communal life that is held together by thousands of organizations. Thousands of organizations that have knitted people together. And in every community, those organizations live by standards of morals or ethics that has been articulated primarily by the religious organizations in those communities. So different organizations, but the same standards. And this is what has knitted America together in such an extraordinary way. And so what he found was, in every little town, there was an Elks Club, there were churches of different denominations, there was a bridge club, there was a sewing club, there was a garden club. And he says, this is the greatness of America. What we've been witnessing over the last 2 or 3 decades is the destruction of that kind of organizational life in America which knits us together. In 2001, this is a commentary about the civic life of America. I'm going to bring it back to the gospel here in a minute. In 2001, a Harvard professor by the name of Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone. It was a seminal book. And this is what he said. He said, for decades, all across America, people have enjoyed bowling. And there have been thousands and thousands of people who enjoyed bowling by bowling in leagues. You can go into little towns, big towns, all across America, and you could see bowling leagues. He said, in my study, he's a sociologist. He says, I've studied this, and something extraordinary has happened. As many people are bowling as ever before, but guess what? Not nearly as many are bowling in leagues. They are now bowling alone. And like a preacher, that was his opening illustration. But he went on to point out the loss of institutional life, organizational life in America. And so let me just illustrate this, I think, the way it will be most compelling to you. If you grew up in a small town in Oklahoma or Texas or Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, the states I'm most familiar with, if you'll think back upon community life in the town in which you grew up, I'll bet you money there were a number of churches. They were all vital. They were probably downtown on the corners facing one another, right? They were the center of community and social life. There was an Elks Club, a bridge club, a garden club. There were all these clubs that formed the social fabric of the community in which you grew up. And for most of you, if you go back to visit your small town these days, many or most of those clubs have disappeared. Probably on one corner of downtown, there is a church that has closed down entirely. All of the churches declining rather than growing. People more isolated than ever before. Rather than knitted together, they are isolated. Putnam said every major sociologist in America today agrees on this: the loss of institutional life in America and the loss of institutional trust. What do people think about Congress? Their trust in Congress at an all-time low. The presidency, trust in the presidency at an all-time low. Corporations, trust in corporations at an all-time low. I'm getting to it. The churches, trust in churches at an all-time low. And so people stay away from the organizations that weave us together as a society. And people are more isolated than ever before, living in isolation rather than in community. I saw a headline article in the Wall Street Journal this past week. I'm going to share it with you. I'll just say to you that you've probably seen the statistics about the declining life expectancy for middle-aged Americans, for the most part white. So you've seen that already, but it was the way in which this Wall Street Journal characterized that decline that got my attention. Death rates rise for a wide swath of white adults, study finds. Increases in deaths of despair. Deaths of despair. Alcohol abuse, drug abuse, liver damage, suicide. You take human beings. You take human beings out of communities where they experience the support, the forgiveness, and the love of other human beings. And this is what you create. Deaths of despair. Now, to Paul's vision, the Christian lifestyle is lived out in community, knitted together by community, a community that is defined by love. I'm going to make one political statement. If we want America to be great again, we will begin to reinvigorate the organizational and institutional life of America. Beginning with the church, which is indispensable because the church is the only institution that has its mission statement that is defined by love. I have self-interest here. I've spent my life in the church. So have many of you. But really, that's besides the point here. I absolutely, passionately believe that this is true. Is the church culpable? Absolutely. Is the church human and weak and sinful? Absolutely. I get it when people say, well, you know, I'm religious or spiritual, but I really don't believe in the church. I understand. I understand why people make that statement. The problem is that we as human beings do not thrive when we are not in community. We do not thrive. We despair. If we want to make America great, we will reinvigorate, bring vitality back to the organizations that knit us together. Paul's vision of what it means to live the Christian lifestyle is not just a matter of not doing the bad things. It isn't even a matter of trying to do the good things. We know about that. By the way, you'll see this vision again in the 13th chapter, the one you know best, the 13th chapter of his first letter to the Corinthians. His vision is not about not doing the bad things. It's not even about doing the good things. His vision encompasses this understanding that we are stronger together than we are alone. And that when we come together because we know what it means to be loved and cared for and forgiven by other human beings who are also fallible and sinful, something extraordinary happens, especially when we do it within the life of the Christian church because we know that we are created by God, loved by God, forgiven by God, and sent forward by God. I'm finishing up here. Let me just say this. Next week, we're going to finish up. It'll be the fourth sermon we have read, that we've preached from just this third paragraph, verses 12 through 17. So I'm going to give you something to be thinking about next week because we're going to hone in on two aspects of what it means to be in Christian community next week. Let me read these two verses for you, verses 13 and 14. Bear with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, Forgive each other, just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds everything together in perfect, guess what? In perfect harmony. That which is precisely missing from our life today. Paul's understanding of the Christian lifestyle was articulated hundreds of years earlier by David, who said, "Lead us in the paths of righteousness." And he would have said, "And knit us together in a community where we love and forgive one another." Amen.